everyone, this is Tech Support by Ardi, and in this video I'm going to teach you about using the freeze panes function in Microsoft Excel. The spreadsheet that you're seeing is an adaptation of the HDMI cable testing results from the Linus Tech Tips video where they test a bunch of HDMI cables with their cable tester. This is a publicly available spreadsheet that you can download through the link in their video description. So with that out of the way, I'm going to explain one scenario where you might want to use the freeze panes function in Microsoft Excel. So you may have run into a situation where you're browsing a spreadsheet like this and you want it to scroll down to see more info as you go through it. But you'll notice that as I scroll down, you'll never, especially if this is your first time looking at the spreadsheet, you'll never know what these values are for. What is 2.0, what is these 6.5, and what are these dollar amounts are for. So you'll have to, oftentimes you'll have to scroll back up, and this column E is the price of each cable in Canadian dollars. Column F is the price of each cable in US dollars. So every time you're looking at a particular cable here, you'll have to scroll back up so you'll know what each of these cells are for. So another thing is that, of course, this entire spreadsheet has a lot of detail, doesn't fit in our screen all at once. So when we scroll to the right, you'll notice that we even have more information included with each of the entries that we have here in our spreadsheet. So you may be wondering, pass or fail. So I don't know, what is this pass for? What cable is this? So I'll have to scroll to the left. So freeze panes solves our problem by freezing or sticking, which I believe is a more accurate term, by sticking on the screen a particular row or a particular set of columns, so that as you scroll, they'll stay on the screen and you'll still be able to tell what each of these cells are for. So you can find the freeze panes function in the View tab of the ribbon. So up here, we go to View, and under the window group, we have freeze panes. So according to the description that you're seeing here, it tells us to freeze a portion of the sheet to keep it visible while we scroll through the rest of the sheet, which is great for checking out data in other parts without losing our headers or labels, which is exactly what we need. If I click on this option, you'll notice that we have three options available to us. We can freeze panes, freeze top row, or freeze first column. So I'm going to explain freeze panes in a bit because this involves selection, as it says in its description. So the first demo I'm going to show you is the freeze top row function, the second option right here. Once I click on it, you'll notice that this is very subtle, but you'll notice a solid line across the bottom edge of row 1. Very subtle, especially if you're on a higher resolution monitor. But you'll know that it works when you start scrolling, and as I scroll, you'll notice that I can still see row 1, and despite the fact that I'm already starting out at rows 29 and so forth, and I can say at a glance, for example, cable 18, number 18 here. Okay, so 3240, that's the price of the cable in Canadian dollars. It's 15 feet. It's rated for HDMI 2.1, and as I scroll here, it failed the cable test. But as I browse through each of these entries, you'll notice that I've lost those cable numbers. So for example, right now I don't know what cable number is in row 51 of my spreadsheet. It's cable number 53, which failed. So you can still see that even though we have solved the problem of sticking the labels of our headers or in row 1 on the top of the screen, or at least the top of our sheet here, we still have to scroll left and right to see at a glance which cables have passed, which have failed, or what each of these failures correspond to which cable. So let's take a look at the third option in freeze panes, which is freeze first column. And if I click here, very subtle again, but you'll notice that on the right edge of column A, we have a solid line. It's easiest to see actually here on on our identifiers for the rows here on top. So you can see that column A has a solid line on its right edge. Columns B and through C and so on, they don't have a solid line. They have a gradient instead of a line. If you're using an older version of Microsoft Excel, it may be slightly different, but the point is you should be able to tell easily if a row or a column is frozen. And since column A is frozen, this will stick here no matter where we scroll. So if I scroll, you can see that at a glance, those cable numbers still remain. And if I go to, okay, I didn't mean to open that, sorry. Okay, if I go to, let's say column J here where we have a pass-fail result, I can tell at a glance, oh, cable number 28 failed, or if I look here, cable number 51, although it passed the assessment, it failed in HDMI 2.1 testing. So you can see at a glance that the cable number here, and we can see a particular description. Oh, what is this for? Oh, it's cable for cable 45. But you'll notice that as I selected the freeze first column or the freeze top row option, it essentially undoes the any freezing that we've done. You may have noticed that we don't get our headers anymore because it's no longer frozen. If I scroll back up, there's no indication on row 1 that it's frozen because we've selected another freeze option. So you might be thinking, how can we have the best of both worlds? I want these labels or headers to stick on the top, and I want these cable numbers to, stick on the side. So I don't have to, I don't have to keep jumping and jumping around. This is where the third option comes in. So before we continue, let me unfreeze. So go here, freeze panes, click unfreeze panes, which will unlock all rows and columns. And once that's done, that edge is gone, and as I scroll, none of the rows or columns are sticking out or staying on the screen. Now, here's where the true magic of freeze panes comes into play. Now, you may have noticed that the first option says that the freeze panes function relies on our current selection. So right now I have selected cell C6, as you can see here. It's highlighted here, and it's also here. Let's see what happens if I trigger freeze panes with that cell selected. As you can see, you'll see these solid lines again. Again, if you're running an older version of Excel, this will look slightly different. But you'll notice that there's a junction of junction here, starting from the right edge of column B and from the bottom edge of row 5. This means that rows 1 through 5 are going to stay on screen, and columns A and B are going to stay on screen. You can see that we've selected cell C6. This means that this area from cell C6 down here, I'm highlighted this area, is going to be affected by the scrolling, while the rest that's not highlighted here will remain on the screen. So if I scroll, I'll scroll, you'll notice that columns A and B remain on the screen no matter how much I scroll. And if I scroll down, you'll notice that rows 1 through 5 stay on the screen. So you can see that this freeze panes command relies on our selection. So the sensible thing is we need to select a cell where we want the scrolling to take effect. And we need to make sure that the top edge of the selection is going to be frozen, and what's left to our selection will be frozen. So, for example, I've selected cell B2. If I'm going to select freeze panes here, freeze panes, this means that with cell B2 selected, once I execute that freeze panes function, whatever is going to be to the left of my selection will be frozen. That columns to the left of the selection will be frozen, so in this case it's going to be column A, and whatever is above our selection will be frozen. So what's above B2, that will be row 1, so row 1 will be frozen. And notice as I scroll, I can still see the headers on the top, but as I scroll to the right, the cable number remains. So it's essentially like freeze top row and freeze first column, except that instead of one or the other, we have both of them active at the same time. So you can see that at a glance, even if I'm in the middle of the spreadsheet here, I can still see the cable number, which is the first column, and I can see at a glance whether they passed or failed the test without having to do this, where I have to scroll and scroll and scroll all over the spreadsheet. Really convenient. But keep in mind, to drive this point home, I'm going to unfreeze. And we're going to move this selection from B2. I'm going to select cell C2 instead. So as we've talked about earlier, when we select freeze panes, it's going to freeze whatever is above, which is row 1, and whatever is to the left of it, which are columns A and B. So you can have multiple rows, multiple columns involved that's going to be frozen. Oh, by the way, I recommend that you make a single cell selection before you select freeze panes. There we go. And once I selected that, columns A and B are going to remain on screen. Columns, while everything in row 1 is going to remain on screen as well. So as I scroll down, I can still see the label. But as I scroll to the right to view my pass-fail results, not only can I tell the cable number, I can see which brand of cable passed or failed the testing at a glance. So that's how freeze panes work in Microsoft Excel. I hope this video has been helpful. Thanks for watching.